What I've noticed amongst Chinese workers around the world, and generally in East Asian workers, is that the attrition rate tends to be lower, and the longevity tends to be higher, because there's just a sense of, I'm in it for life. This is going to take time. It's not just a few years here and there. There's something about Chinese culture that is not about breadth or width, which seems to be shallow, but it's about depth. Going deeper, understanding things more, spending more time. Chinese culture can be more patient because they're like, what's 2,000 years?
Right.
That kind of thinking. Not just going to the different mission trend or fad that's come up, but to say, let's stick and let's keep going.
Hi guys, welcome back to Raw Mission, where we hear from men and women courageously taking the good news of Jesus to the ends of the earth. Unaware of what awaits them, they have chosen a life filled with risk, instability, discomfort, and sometimes danger. But they are very aware of who has called them, who has sent them, and who goes with them. And today I'm joined by Dr. M, a Canadian of Chinese heritage who served for many years on a church planting team in the Middle East, but now lives and teaches college students about Islam in the UK. We'll be discussing the many benefits of being Chinese and working amongst Muslims, some of the challenges of living in shame and honor cultures, and why we should be careful not to treat Muslims as all the same, as a monolithic, static, or undifferentiated cultural group. Well, hi, good morning, Dr. M. It's so good to have you with us on the show.
Hey, it's wonderful to be here. Thank you.
Brilliant. This one's been a while coming. I've been meaning to invite you for a long time. Well, we've been talking about it for a while, haven't we? But I'm glad to have caught you before the academic year begins. And I'm so looking forward to hearing your stories, not just your own background and calling into the nations, but also the experience you've got with the diaspora church and, church around the world, really, as well as the various teaching topics that you have in your academic career that's going on right now. So let's start at the very beginning. We've got a lot to cover today. Tell us your sort of cultural background and where you grew up and those kind of things.
Well, I think maybe we'll go way back to my parents.
Great.
And because I'm Chinese, we like to kind of go back to our ancestors a bit more. So my parents from the Chinese background and from East Asia. And my mother's from quite a wealthy family. But my dad, his father was actually an opium addict. And so they came from very different worlds. And when they met at university, and at that time they were believers already, and my mum thought that my dad was kind of interested in her, she really struggled with that and really had to pray over that because, she was marrying someone who her family wouldn't like her to marry, basically. But she really heard from the Lord. And the Lord said to her, you will be blessed with this guy. And I think she knew that it wasn't about financial blessing. It was about the blessing that comes from the Lord and the kingdom of God. And so she made that step. The family was very upset at her to the point where I think there were some kind of financial repercussions for her. But I think there were some reconciliation over the years thereafter, and they began to like my dad more and more as the years came, emerged later. But I still remember visiting my grandmother 20 years into my parents' marriage. I was only about, in my late teens, but and she said, your dad's a nice guy, but he still doesn't have any money. But my dad was in ministry, and he became quite a leader in the Chinese church world and Chinese church circles. So anyway, that's kind of my background. And we were very much exposed to mission things when we were growing up.
So did you grow up in China?
No, I grew up in Canada, so we immigrated to Canada, and then very much part of a Chinese church. So my first language is definitely Cantonese.
Okay.
And in the Chinese church world, there's different congregations. When I was growing up, there was the Cantonese congregation, there's the English congregation, and more recent years, there's been the Mandarin congregations. So we always have to learn how to be multicultural, even within one church itself, and multilingual as well. So those are the early years growing up in a Chinese family.
Did you go on to study at university in Canada or somewhere else?
Yeah, so my first thing was in Canada, in history and political science. I had thought that I'd end up being an American history and politics professor of some sort. But, God drew me to something else, and I could share more of that story as well. And I've had various degrees over the years. I've had another degree, MA in Middle Eastern Studies, which is economics, history, politics, and an Arabic language component. And then a PhD that I got in England. And that was more in kind of the colonial period, but kind of Muslim-Christian relations oriented.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so why did you get more into that sort of side of things rather than just straight history?
Yeah, well, I guess it goes way back. When I was a teenager, I had started to share the gospel more with Muslim friends in high school in Canada. And at that time, I wasn't very mature about it. And it was very much kind of like, well, I want to kind of win the argument.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
But it was amazing because these Muslim friends, they were the ones that first encouraged me to get involved more in doing this type of thing. They said, you seem to like it and you seem to have some passion for it. So maybe you could, do this more.
Wow.
And so they never became followers of Jesus or whatever, but they were the first people that encouraged me into this. So I feel like I've been called by them,
Yeah, that's interesting because, here in Britain, people get a bit shy of a debate or an argument and we think, no, someone's going to get upset with me. And it's a bit of a cultural, weakness perhaps. Whereas in many parts of the world, a good argument is fantastic and they love it. Certainly probably, Italy or the Arab world and so on.
Well, I think, for Muslim friends I've known, if you are serious about your faith and you want to share about it and talk about it, and then if there are differences, you also talk about those differences. So I think there's that. If we stay too silent, then it becomes, well, are you not serious? Or what are you even thinking about it?
Do you really believe this? Yeah. And as long as you can have a good debate with love and with respect, our tagline in Frontiers, then they will continue to respect that and enjoy that.
Yeah. And I think that friendships are deepened through that anyway, But I also was called to the Muslim world through statistics, actually. And it was when I went to university and got into some short-term mission that I realized that actually at that time there were less, but today there's like 1.8, 1.9 billion Muslims around the world. And the majority have very little access to the gospel. And in fact, the majority of Christian workers seem to be in places where the gospel is quite easily accessible. And so there seemed to be this great imbalance. And so when I was at university, I realized that imbalance. And I just thought, well, it's just a quantitative issue. Like sometimes we think, why has there been so little fruit in the Muslim world? Well, one of the reasons is quantitative. That's all it is.
Nobody's gone. Nobody's trying to reach them.
Very few people. Yeah. And so if we can just address that imbalance, have more do that and get out there. And I think that is one of the possible, answers to this question. And so when I was in my early 20s, I realized that. I thought, this is a quantitative thing. So if and so it wasn't even like, Lord, show me, have this big calling, a great kind of Damascus Road thing. It was just, look at the math. And the math says, we need more people doing that.
Exactly.
So it's purely like, okay, Lord, it makes sense to me. I'm a very rational guy. I'm a cognitive person.
Yeah.
And so I just thought, okay, that just made sense. So I guess I would encourage people to not to just have to listen to this big kind of emotional thing that you might have, although maybe sometimes that happens to people and they need that. But sometimes it's the mathematics. And
definitely. I used to have a little image I would show while I was doing a talk in churches. And it was just this image of a huge log. This is good for Canadians. I mean, I was just in Vancouver for the first time. And there's all these logs everywhere coming down the river. But imagine a giant log and you've got 10 people trying to pick it up. But 9 of them are at one end and one's at the other. Or 30 of them are at one end and one's at the other. That's actually more representative of the statistics, isn't it? And you just think, well, you don't really need a calling from God as to know which end of the log to go help with. Clearly, the one where there's only one guy trying to lift that end up.
Yeah. And many people, are not called to that, and they have other things that God has led them to, and that's absolutely great. But I just think sometimes we could be more open to the quantitative
and
question,
practical about it.
Be more practical. So I think that's another thing. And then the other side of it is, I'm also very interested in travel and seeing the world. I just wanted to go to Europe and see more of the world when I was 19, 20 years old. And then somehow, because of that, God then led me to Muslims. And so I would say it was my Muslim friends, it was statistics, and it was this interest in the world that somehow God brought me to
Definitely. It's a mixture, isn't it? Yeah, I'm exactly the same. I'm shameless in that I say, the love of mountains and good food and cricket in Pakistan was part of how I got drawn there, I'm sure. But obviously statistics and South Asian people.
Yeah.
So where did you end up serving more longer term?
Okay, well, more longer term. I ended up serving 10 years in the Arab world. And I was a single guy for some of those years where I did a postgraduate degree. But I got involved in kind of fellowships of believers from Muslim background. And that was very interesting. I learned a lot and just began to see the Lord move in some really interesting ways. And mostly that was like some gathering of younger men who had a variety of problems and challenges in their lives. And it wasn't always so easy. They struggled with employment issues. So it wasn't always easy to gather people when they had various jobs that they had to go to. And sometimes people struggled with finances, so they couldn't really get to places if they didn't have enough money to pay for the transportation. It was a challenging period for some of them, but I got to see that God was working and there was faith growing and building through some of them at that time.
And presumably challenging your notion of what church is.
Yeah, well, I mean, let me tell you a quick story. This story is both encouraging and discouraging. So where I was, there was a significant minority Christian community that has been there for a long time. And I remember one brother who was from a Muslim background who became a believer in Jesus. And he at that time thought that maybe he could join one of these Christian churches, this Christian community. But when he joined, the Christians there really felt uncomfortable with him. And part of the reason was, I think, they didn't want the extra scrutiny or authorities giving them more attention.
Or locals. Other sort of family members of this guy who might take objection to this.
Possibly.
Blame them.
Although his family lived further away in another part of the country. But another fear perhaps is because they didn't want any of their daughters to marry him, because that would bring problems to their families, and it could have been a little bit difficult or shameful even, because he's from another background that usually has some hostility with the minority community. So it was very difficult for this brother, and he had thought that this Christian community should welcome him and be discipling him, encouraging him, and thinking, wow, this is great that he's now come to our community. But instead, they pushed him away a bit. And I remember him sharing with me how sad he was in that situation. And then I asked him, I said, well, then how does this affect your faith? And this was the most remarkable answer. He said, it doesn't actually. I still believe that Jesus died. He died on the cross. He saved me from sin and death. And he still rose again. He's still King of Kings. He's still Lord of Lords. Wow. All of that doesn't change. I'm still his child. And I just thought, wow, this is somebody who's understanding what it means to be joyful always, and praying continually, giving thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for us in Christ Jesus. Now, he had other struggles as well. But, that moment in time, it was one of the most encouraging conversations I've ever had in my whole life. And I guess when you think of Christian community, there's a variety, right, in all kinds of contexts. There could be those who would be very much part of Christian community as we know it in a traditional sense. And there are other ones who may be able to be other types of communities where most of the people may be from Muslim background as well.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah, different countries around the world, we're seeing different models, aren't we? Yeah, but that is a common challenge for Muslim background believers in many countries, that if there is an institutional or traditional church, how do they bridge those cultural gaps? And we might come back to that later as we talk about Asia again. So tell us more about just your own journey and story there. So at some point you get married when you're on the field?
Yeah, I got married during the years that I was in England. So I was on the field for some time as a single guy. So I knew how to be like a single man on the field type of thing. But I'm embarrassed to say that I got a lot of help by all these married couples. I was on the kind of a group of people that connected with me, and there was about 8 couples and me. Wow. So I always had a place to have dinner.
That's great. I don't think you should be embarrassed by that. That's good. That's the church.
But they took care of me, and Then when I did my PhD in England, that's when I met my wife, and then and got married. And so she is British, so we're kind of cross-cultural marriage. And even that has all kinds of interesting stories.
I know, yes.
I'm sure.
My own experience too.
Oh, yeah. Hey, way to go. I mean, I could just give you some brief kind of anecdotes or something.
Sure, give us a challenge that would be, the sort of the English-Chinese culture clashes. Because that will impact life on the field for those who are in multicultural teams one day.
Yeah, well, maybe, I mean, I'll tell you just a little funny stories.
Sure.
But, when we were engaged, I think we were like walking in a park in London, and she said, "Oh, look at those kids climbing the tree. That'll be like our kids." And I'm like, "My kids won't be climbing trees. That's dangerous." So urban Chinese were like, you don't want that kind of danger, right?
Interesting.
And then I think the English, they like walking in mud in their wellies and stuff. And the Chinese like, we want to avoid mud at all costs. And I would tell her like, oh, we don't go camping. Because we came out urban, life where we like toilets and we don't like to sleep outside in the cold. So she's like, oh, Chinese people don't like camping. But then she thought that was the case because I told her that until like many, many years later, she was talking to my aunt and uncle. And my aunt and uncle had just gone camping.
That's funny.
So anyway,
that is helpful though, because that crosses over into other cultures too, actually, and also just the urban-rural thing. Not that every mission scenario is rural, and you were in an urban context as a single. Did you guys, after you got married, return to the same context?
We went to another very urban context too, but a different one. And I think those are the years of, working with many different nationalities that we had, serving together. And I think one interesting story would be where, so it was during the Iraq War at that time, and Britain was also a pretty close ally of America. And I remember when that war first broke out, we went to a restaurant because I think it was my birthday, and we came out of the restaurant, and the car had all this kind of foam on it that people had sprayed on it, kind of, saying, hey, you're not welcomed here. And I thought, oh, that's probably because of my English wife, right? So that was one moment. But then a few days later, I was at a barber shop, a haircut place, and I think they didn't know that I knew Arabic. So they started talking behind my back, some of the people, about, hey, this guy, why should he get his haircut here? It might be dangerous. Because they were talking about SARS at that time, and I might give them SARS, the virus. So I had said to my wife, "Oh, only they like Chinese people; they don't like English people." But
it flipped.
Then actually, there were also other issues. But by and large, though, I should say that Arab people, and particularly the countries we lived in, very hospitable, very kind, and I shouldn't, portray this too negatively. And very wonderful, wonderful, hospitable people. So anyway,
that's great. Any other anecdotes you want to give us from those times in the Arab world?
Well, I think another one could be I was speaking to a very experienced worker there for a long, long time, and I said, what would be the one tip for anyone new? And he said, just enjoy it and have a good time. And I just thought, oh, all this stuff about suffering and difficulty. But I think he was trying to say, we want to just enjoy all that the Lord has for us in this. And that actually will be a testimony to people. And it made me think of actually a question that I asked an Arab brother. And I asked him, so who are the most effective workers in all of your years of observing? And he had observed for like decades. And he said, well, the ones who enjoy life the most. And I thought that was interesting. Like, instead of this kind of, serious, dour, kind of, sorrowful demeanor, they're talking about people who really have a great time, who really like being there, who really warm to people, really who are just real positive about what the Lord has given them, even though sometimes living these places are not that easy. But there's something about how could people see the Lord that is one of joy if they don't see it in us, And that doesn't take away from the fact that sometimes struggles happen to us.
Yeah, for sure.
But there's something about that, we want to have a good time and celebrate life and celebrate the Lord and celebrate with them.
I love that because obviously so much of the preparation and training we do for folks, there's some stuff, of course, around strategy and longevity and language learning. But, overall, we're saying, the first thing is you love Jesus. Love Jesus. Stay close to Jesus and you'll do well. And then we talk about, your love for each other is going to be a huge testimony. And, of course, your love for the locals. So that's why we dig deep into language and culture so that we can enjoy the people and enjoy the culture and enjoy being there. But I love that. I feel like that's a really good challenge to add love life. Like enjoy who you are as well and enjoy the creation around you and the good things, because it is hard sometimes when you first arrive. Everything's different. You notice all the challenges. Usually at first, you sometimes see all the fun things too. But it's just that daily challenge, I suppose, of spiritual formation, to count your blessings, find the good things, find joy in Christ and in your environment.
Well, it reminds me of the first miracle of Jesus done in a wedding celebration, right? Took place.
That's good.
And then this is an interesting anecdote, talking to other ones that have served in various countries, and one guy who's did a lot of scuba diving, and his team was involved in the scuba diving, and he said, you know what? Our slogan is, God's made a lot of beautiful creatures in the sea, and we're here to enjoy it.
Yes, that's so good.
Anyway, that's
great. And okay, so give us a few of the highlights or some of the real challenges that you and your wife found out there.
Yeah, well, again, I don't want to be so negative, but these are maybe some of the tougher moments, you could say. Sometimes walking around the streets, women could get harassed a bit, and or sometimes be, people can flash them and things like that. But again, we emphasize by and large, people have been so encouraging and so helpful, and so, and it's not like that doesn't happen in other countries either. So.
Did you get any negative? Other negative comments about being a cross-cultural Western and Chinese, or just being Chinese?
Yeah, I think they didn't really comment much on the cross-cultural marriage aspect. And I think, for them, you're already foreign.
You're all foreigners,
So it's not like a big thing.
That's true.
What was interesting, though, was, I taught at a university for a good number of years. And students used to say to me that they couldn't wait until China ruled the world.
Oh, interesting.
And what was interesting about that was, I said, well, why would you say that? And they said, well, that's when we know that America has been crushed. And so I think this kind of resentment of some American kind of foreign policy and other approaches in that region, they would root for somebody that has power to take on America.
And what would you say in response?
Well, I just said, let's just look at it more objectively. Each country has their challenges. Yeah, but I understood where they were coming from.
Yes, whether it's Palestine, Western, whether it's the Gulf Wars. Of course, there's plenty of...
Well, it went back from the Crusades, colonialism, all kinds of things.
So
their experience of the Chinese world isn't so extensive and historic. And in fact, China's done a lot to connect economically and be a reasonable partner, right, to countries around the world. So that was always interesting, that they would be rooting.
I experienced some of this in Pakistan. It's a very mixed feeling about the West there, because in many ways they love the West and they want to send their kids off to study here and come live here. But there's also the hostility and the post-colonial frustration sometimes, and certainly the siding with Palestine and upset when Western pressure is put on Iran if they're Shia or Gulf Wars. But when they would say things like that to me, and they would get really critical of the West, obviously I don't want to get into those conversations much. That's not what I'm there for. I'm trying to avoid politics and all that. But if they really kept pushing, I'd say, you know what? I can't wait until Pakistan rules the world. And there would be this awkward pause. Whereas they're like, okay, wait, he's not being serious. Oh, wow. Oh, yeah. What if we did rule the world, because they're equally critical of their own government.
Yeah, that's right.
And I say, you know what, guys, I don't love everything my government does or has done in history. Come on, let's be fair. Who would want to rule the world? If any nation takes over, hegemony of the world, it's going to get nasty at some point. And I think just trying to undermine some of the assumptions that the East must be better than the West, or the South must be better than the North. Not that I want to defend Britain particularly. I just want to point to the human condition, which is more about why we're there.
Well, I think one way to respond to those questions and those issues, and again, at the moment in the Middle East, the whole Gaza situation is on everybody's mind. But I think one possible response in all of these questions about who rules the world is that, we have our human hearts are sinful, and we're far away from the Lord, and there's questions of power and ego and greed and stuff like this that affects our decisions, and this side of eternity, there's the brokenness of man, and that affects the brokenness of our political systems and our global international order, And in fact, this probably ties back into cross-cultural marriage as well, because I have often thought, when we have disputes or difficulties in our marriage, I would say, it's because you're cross-cultural, and she doesn't understand me, and she doesn't know all of my history and background, my culture and everything. But you know what? Actually, it's sin. It's me holding on to myself and not being unselfish, not counting the cost of the discipleship in my marriage at that time. And I just blamed cross-cultural marriage, but I should actually say, it's sin in my life. And the Lord is using cross-cultural marriage to open up those gates of revealing sin. Right. Now, I say this in such a way that I'm so mature right now. Absolutely not. Today is my 26th wedding anniversary. So there's much, much more to learn.
But the point is good. When these situations come up, and our listeners might be thinking, my Muslim friends raise political questions a lot. I think that is a great idea. Move them towards the human condition and who brings peace. Not just in Gaza. Who brings peace in the human heart between man and woman, but most importantly, between God and man. Who is the peacemaker? Let's move them towards the Prince of Peace and where reconciliation comes from and forgiveness. Hey, you raised a very interesting point that I also have a good story. So some years ago, about 10 years ago, I was invited to speak in this big secular university in East Asia. And at that time, my lecture was on the Islamic State, and its history and why it came to be, and what were the issues and what were the challenges, and building more of a context to it. So there's a lecture. Lots of faculty and students came to that, about 500 people. So it was a really well-attended thing. It's on everybody's mind. And at the end, it was a Q&A time. And one of the students raised their hand and asked, well, what's your solution to it? And then I said, because all that lecture, I didn't talk about faith or, anything, because it was a secular university. But then at that point, I felt that I should say something. So I said something like, well, I believe personally that there is a Prince of Peace. His name is Jesus Christ. And if people can look to him and trust him, then there can be a way forward for peace in people's hearts and in communities around them. That was my answer. And then after the talk, another Christian faculty member came up, and I think he taught engineering or economics or something. But then he said to me, oh, you know what you should have said? And I thought, oh my goodness, like nobody comes up to you and say that. But he came out and said, you know what you should have said? And I thought, oh yeah, tell me what I should have said. And he said, you should have said that the cycle of forgiveness, love, and grace through Christ Jesus defeats and eliminates the cycle of bloodshed and death and revenge. Wow.
That's what you should have said.
That is quite a good answer.
And I said, that's a better answer. And I said, all over the world, when I talk about this issue, I'm going to quote you. So it was a wonderful answer.
No, I like that. It's so important, isn't it? The kingdom of God is not just about eternity and a place with the Father. That's so important. but it's about the kingdom of God on earth as well. You know, who is the reconciler? Who brings forgiveness day to day, not just in eternity. I love that. And I would speak to Pashtuns in Pakistan. As you know, that's the tribe that the Taliban come from, and they have a whole national identity that is founded in revenge and bloodshed. And, you know, if somebody kills someone in your family, you must, as a Pashtun, take revenge. One day, you can wait, but one day you're going to get blood vengeance. Now, I would challenge my Pashtun friends when we're talking about this and say, your faith is so weak. And again, they're looking at me thinking, how dare you? You know, we are the strongest of all the Muslims in Pakistan. You know, we pray 5 times a day. We have long beards. You know, how can you say our faith is so weak? What are you talking about? And I'd say, if you feel you must take your own personal revenge, that means you don't trust Allah to take revenge.
Yes.
We are taught in the Holy Injil, in the Bible, that, you know, you must forgive and you must release vengeance to God. He is the just one. He can do it right. We can't. We get it wrong all the time. So anyway, that's a sidetrack. These are good topics. Sharing this podcast is a great way to encourage more people to get involved with God's great mission, whether locally or globally. Perhaps you know someone whose faith might be strengthened, or God's call to evangelism and disciple-making might be ignited by listening to this very episode. So do share it or any of your favorite episodes with your friends. If you use Apple Podcasts, it's really easy to give us a 5-star rating or to write us a review. And this has a big impact on how many people can find us. And finally, some of you have contacted us to ask if you can give financially to the work that we do. That would be a great blessing to us as we get out and about speaking of God's heart for all nations, for the lost and those who have no gospel witness. A simple way to do that is to go to our website, frontiers.org.uk, and to click the Give button at the top. Thanks, guys. Now let's get back to the interview. Carry on with your story. Any other particular challenges you want to mention that maybe your wife did have it, or just the team went through in those days?
Well, I think one of our early challenges when we first got there was we just had 4 of us in the earliest years. Later on, there was many more people that was part of working together. And a few months into it, there was a major crisis and problem together. And one night, as we were just kind of bringing this all out, it got quite heated. And then this couple just left the room. They went. And I thought, we can't work together anymore. We've only started this like a few months into it. And thought, oh no, what are we going to do now? And he's like my best man, right? So it was really good friends. But, you know, we kept praying, and they came back to our place a couple hours later. And then, you know, at that time, it was before a lot of the, you know, I guess peacemaking training and everything like that. But we just felt we needed to pray together, and just kept praying and just kept praying. The Lord did something really amazing. And I think to this day, you know, they're still very, very close friends. And I think that was just very special, and it was a very important moment. So I guess I would say, when we thought that we couldn't even work together anymore in that kind of heated moment, somehow the Holy Spirit breaks through, and he could change our hearts. It wasn't even the situation and the way, but he could change our hearts together. And I think that was what was important.
That's powerful.
Yeah.
That's good, because team dynamics can be a big challenge. Some people struggle more with the team dynamics. Some struggle more with the local culture. Some just obviously have an incident that happens politically or whatever else that causes trouble. Now, what was it that brought you guys out of that context and back to England, I suppose, or did you go back to Canada? I don't know.
Well, I had a kind of a situation where I was teaching at this university, and I think there's different factors, but I remember one night a fellow faculty member called me and said, my little sister is in your class and you just failed her. Can you fix that? And it was late for me. I had 3 little kids, and it was early for that part of the world, I guess, 11 o'clock or something. But I think I said the worst possible thing. And if I were to rewind the tape, I wouldn't have said it this way. Because I wish I would have been much more relational. And
Go on, tell us what you said.
Let's, Anyway, but I said, you know what? I'm not going to fix it. Because partly she didn't even turn up hardly.
Yeah.
And because sometimes you can give people a second chance or another exam or something. And then I said this. I said, and I don't appreciate this kind of phone call. Well, instantly, the next day, he didn't speak to me. And never spoke to me again. And it got more awkward. And there was other situations like that where various administrators wanted me to pass certain students, and but what I felt was that here I was supposed to be there to build relationships and to communicate the Lord and to connect with people as friends. And what I did actually cut off the friendship, cut off those relationships. And it was not honoring in an honor-shame situation. I should have learned a lot more how to deal with it. And so what I learned was that you could have all the nice apologetics in the world, and you could have all the nice kind of friendly hospitality stuff in the world. But if you don't understand honor-shame dynamics, it could actually nullify the whole thing.
Right.
So what I should have done was probably say something like, you know what, it's late now, let's have lunch together tomorrow. It would have given much more opportunity to share faith and life and reasons and rationale.
Because you're important to me, you're a respected faculty member, and this is an important issue, your love for your sister. This is great, this is a good thing. Let's sit and talk, even if you can't do that.
But at least you're growing that relationship. Do whatever you can to grow the relationship. What I did was actually cut the relationship by being really in your face.
And blunt. And kind of, practical.
And there was no way back to that because you would, you just put people into a corner.
I had a similar thing when I taught in a university, and I got a call. Mine was a bit different because the exam hadn't happened. I got a call saying from someone quite high up in the university saying, my relative's coming to your class, the exam is coming up, isn't it? I'd love it if you can mark her paper personally. And of course I knew what that meant immediately. I up her grade, make sure she passes. And I came off the phone and I was in a bit of, I've never had this before. And I said to my Pakistani colleagues, I want to see the paper of this particular student. I'm going to mark it myself, and I'm going to make sure nobody tampers with it. And exactly the justice of the mark she deserves is what she will get. So I wasn't quite, I didn't say anything to him. I just said, oh, thanks for letting me know. And I put the phone down, but I didn't work on that relationship. I probably made lots of mistakes. But anyway, she did fail as well. And soon after that, I didn't get my salary for a while. But I wish I'd known better how to deal with it.
So it was soon after that somehow my continuation there kind of fizzled. I mean,
who knows?
Nobody ever tells me what the reasons are and all that, but it could have been something. So,
any other tips for sort of honor and shame in those kind of societies?
Well, I think honor and shame is about this positive atmosphere as we kind of connect with people, certainly in a public way. But I think those private conversations, always finding how do we keep relating and how do we share honestly, but also in a way, not to push people into a corner as much, but to kind of find a way, give them out, find a way to share your heart, but also with a lot of love and respect, I think. So, I don't know. I mean, it can be very challenging, and there's a lot of sensitivities. But I think that's one of those things that particularly those who are used to more of a Western style or truth, justice-based way of approaching life and situations, should actually be very, very aware of something that could be radically different. Yeah.
And that's equally as true when sharing the gospel, isn't it?
Yes.
And sometimes I like to talk about Jason George's work. I might put some of his books in the show notes. He's written a book called The 3D Gospel. I may have mentioned it before. I think it's excellent, just in helping us think of different ways to present the gospel that are equally biblical. Plenty of stories and things in Scripture that talk about the shame and the covering and so on of our shame, rather than just the forgiveness legally of our sin and so on.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and it's amazing how the Bible is rooted in a shame honor context as well. And although, that's how wonderful God is, because Paul is also Greek Roman, less he also speaks to the other world.
That's right, the Hebrew and the Greek, I suppose,
both together. And that's how amazing our God is. He speaks to both sides.
Definitely. In fact, one of the books on my desk is Ministering in Honor Shame Cultures, I think by the same author, and maybe another one, but we'll put those in the show notes for those who want to dig deeper on that. Great. So what happened next?
Well, we then came back to Britain, and I got involved again as a research fellow at a university, and then later on also taught in theological education, and then the whole world of Islamic studies as well. And I think what I can share is, what I am passionate about in sharing about Islam, it's diversity. Islam is very wide, and there's all kinds of topics within Islam, but I like to share about Islam's diversity. And I use all these S words to capture its diversity. So there's the Sunni Shia, probably the most common historic difference. Sharia is also, there's different interpretations of that. The spiritual world of Islam, it can be quite diverse as we look at how Muslims engage the spirit world.
Mysticism and folk Islam.
All kinds of that, those are... and Sufism is an experiential form of Islam. That's another expression of its diversity. Salafism, going back to the ancestors, that some would tie to more radical interpretations of Islam. And then there's the secular Islam, which is also very different and maybe more aligned with the West, so to speak. And then the scope of Islam is very, very wide, all these different countries, all these different cultures. So when we look at the diversity of Islam, that's what I'm passionate about, because I think that's quite important. Because when we think of Islam as monolithic, I think we do a disservice to it. But we think of its diversity. I think of 3 different words that's helped me to kind of be more sensitive, right, to what Islam is. So the first word I would share is context. So 3 C's. Context. If we understand the diversity of Islam, we cherish and want to learn and understand every different context that we're dealing with. So we don't have one size fits all. We don't have one answer for everything. It encourages us to understand, to learn, to listen, to go deeper into various cultures. Whether it's Pashtun poetry, or whether it's like forms of Indonesian music, or finding ways like Paul did in Acts 17, that there's the gospel that's there already, and what are the ways in their culture that will bring out the gospel message. I think so. If we look at the diversity of Islam and looking at context, that will help us to do that. And the second word is creativity. So if we understand the diversity of Islam that is not monolithic, then the more we can be creative, the more we are innovative about our approaches, and we work in all kinds of different ways. And I think with 1.9 billion Muslims around the world, really no one has invented the wheel. We do see significant movements around now of several thousand believers. But when we look at the broad scope of things, there's much we can learn, much more we can innovate. And we need to seek the Lord for creativity. We've learned a lot, I know, but we can also grow in the creative thinking.
And partly because the world keeps changing.
And the world
and at more and more of a rapid pace.
Right.
So younger Muslims think very differently 10 years ago than even young Muslims think today.
Yeah, that's true. And then I think the third one is complementarianism, or maybe comprehensiveness. And what I mean by this is that, because the Muslim world is so different, and there's so many different contexts, and that we need so much creativity, it means that everyone could be involved. We can all complement each other. We can all be part of this. It's a comprehensive thing that requires the gifting of the whole church all around the world.
That's good.
And it's not just one or two good arguments or one or two good apologetic responses, but it means a lot more than that. Something related to prayer or worship. I've seen meetings in the Arab world where Sufis came and they treasured the worship time so much, and it was a way that God connected with them through Christ. And it was not even Arabic music, it was Hillsongs in English. And then prayers for healing and miracles through all that spiritual world of Islam. And then even pop culture and media influencers and all that with young Muslims and secular Muslims. So we need the whole church to be involved. I marvel at some of our co-workers who are from Korea who started kind of Korean cultural centers, because some parts of the Muslim world and the Arab world, other places, they love K-pop and they love Korean drama.
Yeah.
And they're like, this is great. And so Korean workers are like, you know what? We can use this to bring people in to learn Korean cooking and talk about Korean drama and learn Korean language.
Great idea.
And Korean music, and then have events that really communicate Christ.
I like that on the macro level, because I've talked about that before on a very personal level. We have to listen. Who is this person in front of us? He's not just a Muslim, because that could mean so many things. And all those scales, like you just mentioned in a slightly different way, I used to have all these sliding scales from, traditional all the way to modern, or extremist down to radical, down to fundamentalist, down to liberal Muslims. And it's the same idea as, well, who's the person?
That's right.
That's what is. And if you listen and get to know the person in front of you, then you can share the gospel, you can connect with them better, in the most appropriate way.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. But you're saying, actually, this is important on a global scale as well, just with different cultures bringing the gospel and connecting. And I love that. That's something I hadn't thought about.
Yeah, because the diversity of the Muslim world means that maybe some other cultures can also reach them in other ways. That creative, we never thought about.
Yes, that's great. Well, that's a great segue into what would be the particular gifting, skills, cultural background that Chinese you can speak into. Maybe this is true for Asians generally, but what benefits do they have crossing cultures into the Muslim world that perhaps Westerners wouldn't have? What are your natural sort of connecting points?
Well, it's actually quite a few, but let me just say, I'm also from a particular context as a Chinese person, and so I don't speak for all Asians, and I'm also but I would say that, and maybe I could just say in terms of the Chinese world, and then maybe that can connect to Asians. And if there's listeners who are from Chinese background, I hope this can be an encouragement as well. But I think there are maybe around 10 reasons that I think the Chinese have, some blessing, right, that can help them in this whole endeavor. So first, the Chinese economy has opened doors for Chinese to work in many, many different nations. There's some disadvantages, and we can go into that, but there is this bridge that the Chinese economy has opened up for many Chinese to serve and work in various countries. So that's one thing. So there's an openness, and so there's visas and things that people can get, and opportunities. Number two is that due to China's global influence that's growing, many people around the world are used to or growing and working with Chinese, and some of them are learning Mandarin, and some are even opening doors for Mandarin teachers or Chinese business opportunities. So that's another thing.
Yeah, I saw
Chinese
that.
Language and culture is getting more.
Where I was at the university, I changed it from being the English department to the modern languages department, knowing that Chinese was coming through Pakistan a lot with different professions. And they're open to learning Chinese because it's just simple trade across the border.
Exactly, And I mean, Chinese cultural events, I know that's happening more even in various parts of the Arab world. And also Chinese restaurants.
Yes.
When I went 30 years ago, or more than 30 years ago now, maybe 33 years ago when I first went, there were one or two Chinese restaurants. But where I know now, there's many more. So just that alone, there's a lot of connection. And then Chinese believers all over the world, many of them live in diasporas, And so they already have a history of adopting new contexts. Number 4, many diaspora Chinese are already bilingual, already multilingual. And this can help them pioneering in new situations. Number 5, many Chinese have good education, actually, and some very good professions that can be used in global contexts in corporations and tent-making opportunities. Number 6, many Chinese are blessed with financial resources, so they can be good senders, Number 7, many Chinese have a strong commitment to piety and prayer, which is a heartbeat of missions as well. So Chinese Christians tend to be quite disciplined.
Would you say there's some influence there from Watchman Nee and some of those writings way back?
Well, if I can say something about some of those key influences, Watchman Nee was definitely a huge influence in the kind of the Christian piety movement of really deep discipleship through the scriptures. Then you have the influence of Ming-Dao, who brought out suffering and persecution and that whole
I was wondering if that might be on your list, actually.
Tradition of Chinese believers. And then later on, Philip Teng and Thomas Wang, very much part of encouraging theological education and deepening in theological understanding. And Thomas Wang bringing about the Chinese Coordination Center World Evangelism movement out of Lausanne that brought about world mission and the Chinese responsibility for world mission. So, these key leaders over centuries.
That's good. I'm going to put some of those in the show notes too, because you'll have to help me with some resources there.
And even someone like John Sung, who, had a PhD in America in engineering or in chemistry or something like that, the famous moment where he left his American university and he threw his PhD certificate into the ocean and said, my life is dedicated to evangelism. And so that tradition of evangelizing peoples is also part of the Chinese Christian influence. So I think all of this together and all of these leaders exemplify something of the rich Chinese Christian history. So number 8, going back to this list, Chinese culture has a strong commitment to discipline, stickability, perseverance, longevity, suffering, as we mentioned. And so what I've noticed amongst Chinese workers around the world, and generally in East Asian workers, is that the attrition rate tends to be lower, and the longevity tends to be higher, because there's just a sense of, I'm in it for life. This is going to take time. It's not just a few years here and there. There's something about Chinese culture that is not about breadth or width, which seems to be shallow, but it's about depth, going deeper, understanding things more, spending more time. Chinese culture can be more patient because they're like, what's 2,000 years? That kind of thinking. Not just going to the different mission trend or fad that's come up, but to say, let's stick and let's keep going. Number 9, Chinese culture has a lot in common with some Muslim culture. Honor, shame issues, high context, formalities, titles, and, importance of family, honoring parents, collective decision-making. All of these things seems to have more alignment with Muslim culture than some of the West. And then number 10, Chinese culture respects age and experience, gray hair. And that's similar to Muslim culture, but also that just an encouragement to say, for many who are retiring sometimes earlier from the Chinese world, I think of many who may have come to Britain from Hong Kong, who've retired early. Hey, this is a great opportunity to be involved and to open up your heart and your life and resources for world mission, not just here in the UK, but around the world. And maybe this is your opportunity. Some I know who are still young, who's come in their 50s and maybe already retired, but the Lord has blessed you and with time and opportunity and resources, and maybe this is the moment.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
And there may be some of our listeners who don't know the incredible growth of the Chinese church over the last several decades. And they carry that history with them and that experience. And that's really helpful for the rest of the global church to learn from. And not just the suffering, but the growth and how they've managed that. So many things. Thank you. That's really, really helpful. What a challenge for all diaspora communities to listen to today. What are the ways that your culture can bless the Muslim world, but also you personally. Is the Lord saying something to you? Great. Any final thoughts?
Well, yeah. I mean, one of the things I'm involved with more now is encouraging more Asians and East Asians to be involved in mission. And so that's been exciting. We're really part of this global effort. We see young Asians getting involved. I was just at this conference in a huge Southeast Asian country. They had hundreds of young people participate in a mission conference. That was so encouraging.
I'm so grateful to be part of an organization where brothers and sisters from all over the world, from Africa, from Latin America, Europe, Asian countries, we're working together for the glory of God in some of the toughest places in the world. Thank you so much, Dr. M, for being with us and for sharing the stories of your life and some of your perspectives as well, what you're learning and what you're teaching and passing on to students. So may the Lord raise up many more Asians for God's work in God's harvest fields. And thanks for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Matt. This is great.
All right, God bless. Bye.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us today, guys. Do get in touch if you want to share how God is speaking to you through the podcast, or if you want to partner with us in raising up more workers for the harvest. You can email me personally, matt@frontiers.org.uk. Here's a great quote to end with from Brother Yun. If you have more than one Bible in your home, I challenge you to have a bit more compassion and think about those who have never had access to the Word of God. Have a great week and make sure you don't miss our next episode.